Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. So today I want to have a free-form discussion about the future, what we can expect, and how we're going to prepare for it. Let's get to it. Okay, before I start off this talk, I want to say for the 10th time, if you see somebody in the comment section with the name Canadian Prepper and they don't have a check mark beside their name, and they're asking for WhatsApp information, I don't use WhatsApp. They're imposter channels. They're a dime a dozen. Every time I pluck one, another 3 grow back. So there's really nothing I can do about it at this point until YouTube finds a way to regulate that somehow. I wanted to talk about what the world is going to be like in 2030. I've done a few featurettes on what the world might be like in 2030 and beyond. Although those are more for entertainment purposes, okay? I want to talk today about what I really actually think it's going to look like. And the reason why this is so important, the one thing that is one of the most self-evident truths to me, is that if I was pulling the levers and pushing the buttons on the Most High, okay, if I was the one who was overseeing everything that's going on, and by that I mean the people in the 0.001%, the parties that we never get invited to, I would never in a million years inform the population if there was going to be a massive asteroid that was going to hit the planet. And that's really all you need to know in terms of why it's going to be up to you to decipher what's coming. Because the fact of the matter is, in order to avoid panic, in order to prevent total societal breakdown and chaos in the streets, the powers that be, for lack of better terms, are never ever going to let people know what's coming if it's going to be completely catastrophic. I'm not saying that's what's coming. I'm just saying it's called the noble lie. Okay, it's this idea that if you tell people the truth sometimes, it could lead to worse outcomes than telling them a noble lie. So, for that reason, the select few who care, the select few who seek to see beyond what's right in front of them, are tasked with the job of trying to figure out what is coming next. So let's just talk about what I think is coming in 2030. And the reason why I use 2030 is because it's within sight now. It's not too far off. It's within visual range. And the older you are, the closer 2030 is, because you know how fast a decade can elapse. I think it's becoming very evident right now that there is tension brewing between East and West. You know, you couldn't have picked better books than Brave New World in 1984 to really describe what is happening right now. You know, you have Eurasia, Oceania, and what was the other one? I can't remember. There was another continent that were all at war with one another. Then, of course, everything that happened in the book, The Brave New World, is coming true like to a T, which is inspiring me to make a video in the coming weeks about 10 movies that I believe best predict the future. If you were to put all these movies together into one universe in just the right amounts, they would predict the future. The world in 2030, what's it going to look like? Well, on the one hand, we see these incredible technological advances. Okay, we see China now wanting to invest in thorium nuclear power plants, which is a much safer and cleaner way to do nuclear. Something we could have done for the longest time. The only reason why it wasn't done is because countries wanted to refine plutonium, weapons-grade plutonium. And so they're going to be going with thorium. We're seeing decentralized currency emerge. Okay, there's a prospect of a greater future where we can all just Netflix and chill all the time and be served by robots and have everything made by automation, 3D printers. There's a future in which self-driving cars take us to wherever we want to go, and where we can grow food indoors in vertical farms, even though the flip side of that is that vertical farms are very inefficient, and the only ones I've seen so far cost billions of dollars, and they essentially grow lettuce or $1,000 strawberries. Okay, on the one hand, there's a part of humanity which is going to prevail through this. On the other hand, I see what I call the massive human correction coming. There's a massive human correction coming because, as Brett and Heather Weinstein talk about in their book, is that we've been completely ignorant to what's called the precautionary principle. And it's this idea that when we make technological advances, there's always side effects. Like, when you watch one of those commercials and they tell you how this pill is going to make you happy, and at the end of it, they ramble off like 100 possible side effects. The whole idea with that is that we are entering an age of consequences, where we no longer can continue to hold back the floodgates of this precautionary principle with science. Okay, it's like plugging holes in a ship. I've used that metaphor before. You can only there's only enough stuff to plug so many holes in a ship. And we're starting to see a lot of things happen around the world. One of those things is the decoupling of China and the United States. I've just recently watched a documentary about how China and the US could potentially be on the brink of war. And one thing they failed to mention, and one thing nobody seems to really be talking about a lot, is the fact that if that ever were to happen, the grocery stores, the shopping malls here would be absolutely empty. I'm starting to think, this is just a theory, like I said, don't get caught up in the minutia, that maybe they're going to just let China go in and do what they want with Taiwan, because it's better than the consequences of not having billions and billions of dollars of consumer goods transported over here. Now, the saving grace to all this at some point down the road will be automation, because if things can be made domestically cheaper through automation, then you don't need all this shipping container stuff. And that's what they're trying to work towards, is finding ways to manufacture goods at a cheaper price, better, and domestically. So you cut down on transport fees. You don't have to worry about the supply chain. The supply chain will be drastically cut down to size, to a more manageable size. You could literally have production centers in every major urban center, which would cut down on the mileage from place to place. These are some of the positives of decoupling. However, there's a huge drawback with that. Once we're decoupled, there's no incentive not to go to war if your economies have been effectively decoupled. Now, a lot of people are going to say, well, China still needs the US to consume stuff. That may be true, but they have a very large portion of their population which could easily replace the consumers in the US with their own, and they could offshore their labor to Africa, which is basically what's happening. China is now making Africa what China was to the United States. And this is why they're trying to get this whole Belt and Road Initiative thing off the ground, because they basically want to be the head of that region. If this happens, this de-incentivizes the US and China not going to war. Now, let's stop fooling ourselves. Nobody's throwing the nuclear word around nearly enough when they talk about this. They're talking about China, Taiwan. They're not talking about nuclear exchanges. Now, obviously, nobody's going to win in a situation like that. Although some, I've heard, do believe that a nuclear war is actually winnable. Do I think that's going to happen? You know what? I just simply don't know. What I do find interesting, however, is that all of the Commonwealth countries, after this whole thing happened in the last 2 years, the thing, if you say it, then you're dodging crosshairs with big tech anyways. What's happened in the last 2 years, particularly in the Commonwealth countries, Australia, Canada, and UK, of course, is an increased authoritarianism, because they have recognized that in the case of a global disaster, no matter what the disaster is, a dictatorship is going to be able to deal with it much better, because there's not all these bureaucratic hoops you have to jump through to get things done. I'm not saying that a dictatorship is better, obviously. Financially, in terms of growth and innovation and new ideas, there's no doubt about it that a free, open market with less restrictions, more laissez-faire, is going to be much better and much more prosperous in the long run. But when it comes down to the run-up to war, what is going to happen? That's when the advantages of totalitarianism for lack of better terms, become obvious, because you don't need congressional approval to do this and that. You can just do it and get it done. And this is why China is in an advantageous position right now, because even though they might not have as many, fighter planes or aircraft carriers, they could easily, on a moment's notice, mobilize for that without the need for any sort of bureaucratic process, because it's effectively a dictatorship. When you have a dictatorship, just like George W. Bush said, this would be a lot easier if I was a dictator. And he was 100% right. In times of crisis, being a dictator is much easier than having to appease all the voices who are dissenting. What we are seeing now, it appears, is that in the run-up to this clash of titans, we are seeing the authoritarian noose get tightened and tightened. The collars on people are getting tightened. I don't think it's any surprise that countries have realized how China dealt with the situation, whether that was welding people in homes or whatever the case might be, that they had an advantage in dealing with the thing in the last 2 years. Whether or not it leaked or whatever, they obviously clearly had an advantage in dealing with it because they didn't have to worry about people's rights and freedoms and all this. We had to worry about that here, which is a good thing. Don't get me wrong. I'm on that side, okay? I'm on the side of rights and freedoms. But a lot of people are oblivious to the fact that what we might be moving ourselves into right now is a situation by which the authoritarianism is increasing because the countdown to war is happening. Now, I'm not saying that for certain, but one other thing I know, and this is where I'm going to lose some people because not everybody is as firm. I don't want to call it a believer because I'm just looking at the facts of this, okay? And I've heard all the conflicting stories, guys. I live and breathe on YouTube. I've seen every possible dissenting voice on this topic on YouTube. And it's blatantly evident to me that the climate situation is incredibly real. Now, just like you, I am very reluctant to concede any sort of freedom to any governing body who I would say would be complicit in the problem up until this point because of the cronyism and the oligopolies, that have basically brought us to this point in the first place. If it was such a big problem before, it probably would have been effectively dealt with by now. Just like we did with the ozone layer, CFCs and stuff like that back in the 70s, 80s. We dealt with that problem, and I think it's still healing, but it's almost healed. So we know that we can deal with these problems, but it appears that nothing is going to get done with this particular problem, and the reason why is quite simple. Because it requires globalization and nobody wants to take a hit to their economy. Yes, we're seeing in some pockets of the world some restrictions being placed on various types of fuel, but not nearly enough, not even remotely close enough to put a small dent in the annual output of CO2, much less start, sucking it out of the atmosphere and doing this, what do they call it? Sequestering, carbon sequestering. We're not even there yet. That costs so much money in itself that thinking that we're going to be able to do that on the cheap is a pipe dream, in my personal opinion. A lot of people say we're past the point of no return with that. So if you know that you're going to have this potential war, if you know you're going to have immigration crises in the future, if you know that in spite of technological deflation, in spite of the fact that technology is going to improve to the point where we can produce more stuff for less energy input, in spite of all that, there is still going to be economic contraction. There is still going to be inflation. There's going to be an increase in food prices. And we could potentially see, as a result of the climate thing, a significant reduction in agricultural output. A lot of people say, well, yeah, but then Canada is just going to be warmer and extend the growing season. It doesn't work like that. The soil that we need in order to do that takes many generations in order to come about, and probably many hundreds, if not thousands of years. Okay, the soils of the north are not made for that sort of thing. You can't do what they're doing in Brazil to grow crops in, northern Canada and the boreal forest. It just wouldn't work. So we very likely will, with the breakdown of the jet streams, the erratic weather patterns, which are going to throw for a loop all of the existing infrastructure that's in place. Like if we're growing grain in the grain belt and suddenly the grain belt cannot produce any more grain because there's no water there, that means we have to move that operation elsewhere where that infrastructure doesn't exist. Another place where this is going to cause problems is in those cities that reside along those rivers that are drying up. And there are rivers that are drying up. There's a lot of people who are in disbelief. If you live in Phoenix and you know that 50% of your water comes from the Colorado River, and you know that you consume, not you personally, but your city consumes 4 to 5 times more than is naturally available within that region, well, the clock is ticking. It's only a matter of time. You need to get a get out of Dodge plan now. You cannot wait until it's mainstream news, like a lot of people are hearing now about the Christmas shortages. Every news report I hear now, just like clockwork, is all about how stuff is going to be short on the shelves this year and how if you want stuff, you got to go get it now. Well, no, the time to get it was last month when we were talking about it and when my one video was maybe seen by a tiny minuscule fraction of the North American population. Now, we also have the issue of where we're going to be culturally in 2030. The next question is, where are we going to be culturally in 2030? It's really difficult to say, but right now what we're seeing in China is they are starting to crack down on whatever freedoms and liberties were given to the people 20 years ago in anticipation of something. Okay, and by that I'm talking about different means of cultural expression, like they're starting to crack down on boy bands. What they're trying to do is defeminize their society effectively. In anticipation of what? In preparation for conflict? Who knows? But we are, of course, seeing the complete reverse on the side in the West, where it's practically District 1 of the Hunger Games. And everybody's everything. It's a postmodern mishmash of unisex everything. There is a possibility of sterility actually becoming a real problem in the first and the developing world. That is a possibility. And that's not only the result of actual physical problems being caused by the chemicals we're ingesting and being exposed to, but it's also the cause of this culture which doesn't want to have family anymore, or at least a culture which is not fostering a nuclear family in ways like it once did. And because of that, that's going to throw a wrench in the whole reproduction, repopulation thing, which is just in time for the mass influx of climate refugees that are going to be coming on the scene. Now, again, I don't want people to get caught up in the minutia of this. I'm trying to understand this from a bird's eye view. We can see that right now there's consolidations happening on all fronts. Cultural consolidations, economic consolidations, the consolidation of power in the hands of fewer and fewer people. I mean, just the fact that throughout the last 2 years, the bankrolls of the elites have become so much bigger, while everybody else's purchasing power has diminished, while lots of people have lost a lot of income, even though many people have gotten their jobs back, at what cost, and how much money have they lost throughout the course of this, whereas the people who were in a privileged position before that, who had investments in these tech companies which were able to exploit this opportunity, those are the people who've made out like bandits in all this. So the wealth gap has increased. And all of these things, like the cultural hedonism, the capriciousness of conspicuous consumption, this whole cultural disintegration and postmodernism, you would think that it would have to reach a breaking point at some point where things just effectively don't work because there's no rules, there's no morals. And this is why that Hunger Games movie is so incredibly prescient. Because, and I've made a whole video on this very topic, is that as your population becomes more flimsy and flaccid and I guess just for lack of better terms, more effeminate. There's all these luxuries and you don't have to really work hard in a physical, laborious sense for anything anymore. As your population becomes more complacent, there's also this other part of the population which becomes more hardline and authoritarian to complement that. So whereas before people had these defined roles, men and women, and I'm not saying that this was good or bad necessarily, I'm just saying it is what it is. You had the matriarch and you had the patriarch, okay, and men perform certain roles and women perform certain roles. As this has become more dissolved, what has happened is that the entire population, for lack of better terms, has become more feminized. And the patriarchy and the authoritarianism has been concentrated in the hands of a few. So we've extracted whatever authoritarian masculine nature has been in this mass of people, and they've concentrated it into the hands of an increasingly militarized police force, of more consolidated power blocks in government who have more sweeping powers to do basically whatever they want. And you have these two things that complement one another. So it gives the illusion of freedom. Okay, the illusion of freedom. When I go on the trending page, that's what I see. I see the illusion of freedom because I know on the back end of it is oligopoly. Okay, it's cronyism, it's nepotism, it's autocracy, effectively. All of the ocracies except democracy, even though it gives the illusion that that's what it is. And this is what you would expect in the run-up to war, because there's no way in hell that these people are going to be ready to fight an actual war when they don't even know basic survival skills. You need to take all the heavy hitters in society, put them on the payroll, put them in a suit, and say, you are basically going to rule over these people over here having a good time with an iron fist. And that's how this whole thing is going to work. That's what the Hunger Games was, effectively. Obviously, there was different districts, and each of those districts had varying degrees of prosperity. District 1, of course, is akin to the Western world. We're the ones that have the most stuff. We have the most freedoms and frivolity. It appears as life is just peachy over here, which for the most part, I mean, it's great, you know? Netflix, skip the dishes, high-speed internet, what more could a guy ever want, right? Well, unfortunately, because of the precautionary principle, coming back to that again, there is going to be consequences of this. You cannot sustain a population like that. My honest-to-God view of this is the following, and this is something that a lot of people are scared to consider because it means that the situation is out of control. Look, whether you believe it or not, I know there's some people who love this idea, maybe don't love it, but they love to believe that there's a shadowy group that's pulling all the strings and they control all the variables. Like this is some kind of video game or something and there's no unintended things that happen. Well, that's just not the case. The truth of the matter is, at least as far as I can see it, is that we as a species have been flying by the seat of our pants throughout our entire human evolution, okay? Especially in the last few hundred years. And we've made a lot of mistakes. And those mistakes now have consequences which are largely unavoidable. We are now going to be put in a predicament where the consequences of our overpopulation, I know some people don't like that word too, but it is overpopulation when everybody's consuming 50 times what they actually need in order to survive. It's not overpopulation when everybody's at a sustainable level, but it is when we're in capricious, conspicuous consumption. You have the scarcity of resources, which is going to cause more conflicts coming to a head. Okay, you have China and the US. You have the wealth disparities that are coming to a head. You have technological advances bumping up against age-old economic models, which has to come to a head. You have the climate, which by and large does have certain expiration dates, for lack of better terms, that is going to be coming to a head. So you do have these things which are coming. And if you have these things that are coming, you have to tighten the noose. What we're going to see is a further restricting of what you can do, where you can do it. For the last few years, they've been really popularizing this van life, tiny home movement stuff. And I think everybody is deluded into thinking that, oh, they're promoting self-reliant lifestyles. No, it's evident that the things that have been trending in that department have been tiny homes, van life, living in your vehicle. How many videos that have 10 million views are there of people who are living in their vehicles? Do you know how crappy it is to actually live in a vehicle, to have to find a washroom to use every single day? Sure, you could probably do it for a year or so when you're traveling in a place, when you're young and you're full of energy and you don't know much about life yet. Sure, that's fun. But you can't do that forever, even though there's this other idea that you will be happy and you will own nothing, which is the nomadic lifestyle. I've made a video before where I talked about how the future is nomadic, where we would regress back to a form of post-technocratic nomadism, where you didn't really own everything, where it's just Airbnb. Everybody just lives wherever, everything is shared. You know, you don't really, because everything is automated, and it's kind of like a Star Trek type thing where you don't buy things, and at the same time you don't possess anything, so you really have no rights over any specific thing. So it's a freedom, but it's actually, you're not free because you don't have any possessions in a sense. Even though from a Tibetan standpoint, they may well say, well, freedom from possessions is true freedom. But anyways, what do they say in Fight Club about how when your stuff starts to own you, or when you have too much stuff, it starts to own you, something like that? Anyways, it does seem like there's this push towards minimalism, but that should not be confused with self-reliance. I see a lot of people building these self-reliant homes, these million-dollar, multi-million-dollar homes in the forest that, you know, maybe they can do that, but the fact of the matter is 95% of the people could never afford to do that unless they were making $1 million a year vlogging about it. And not everybody can be a vlogger, not everybody can be Bitcoin rich, not everybody can be a OnlyFans millionaire. Okay, this is the future that people think is going to be sustainable, but unfortunately it's not going to be sustainable. So the nomadism and the self-reliance that they're selling, it's a cookie cutter, it's McDonald's, it's Disneyland. It's not really what is going to get us where we need to be truly self-reliant. They probably want you in a tiny home on a tiny street in a really, really big, densely populated city. That's probably, you know, ultimately where this ends up. And when I say they, I say they in the sense of government, in the sense of the system, you know, not necessarily any distinct shadowy cabal who's planning this, because let's face it, these dinosaurs, they're on their way out. You know, what do they care about what happens in the next generation? It's really a systemic thing at this point, which is moving everything forward, I do believe. So 2030 is largely going to look like 2021 on massive injections of steroids, effectively. We are likely to see the emergence of more and more viruses. We've seen SARS, we've seen MERS, we've seen SARS-CoV-2. Now, what is next? Whether leaked or naturally occurring, we are going to see more and more of these things. And the big one is going to come at some point. Now, it may come after society has disintegrated to the point where our healthcare systems just simply cannot support it anymore. And where there's so much resistance to the increased draconian style approach to dealing with it, you know, people are just not going to accept it anymore. Or there's just going to be so much polarization and that nothing is going to get done in the democracies. So they are effectively going to turn over into autocracies. 2030 is not looking good. We are going to have major climactic shifts, which are going to drastically impede our ability to grow food at scale. I mean, it's not even a question of if this is going to happen, it's to what degree this is going to happen. If we start to get complete Arctic sea ice melt in the coming years, that is going to lead to a total breakdown of the world's food supply system. And it's scary, guys. It's very scary. And look, this year was the year. I mean, it's the year that most people should have woke up to this fact. I just watched a video about the fires that have been going on here for the last couple weeks, which are way out of season. Okay, there's an old timer, old firefighter, fire chief, been on the job for 50 years in the region where this fire is burning, said that he's never seen anything like this so late in the season. On top of the fact that the water levels are so low throughout this province, it's terrifying. Now, I know in some places they're getting deluges, they're getting flooding, they're getting torrential rains day after day. And this is the trend. It depends on where you fall on this wavier jet stream. And this winter, it could be a very harsh winter for certain parts of the world and be incredibly mild and warm for other parts where it's normally quite cold. And it's just the fact that these changes are going to be occurring, which is just going to throw off the ecosystems, which our infrastructure is hardwired to. That's going to create massive problems. It's going to cause more social unrest. So you are going to see more separation along the lines of race and gender and all of these things, because these things are going to become more intensified as the stress, as the economic stress bears down on people. You're going to have police who are tasked with dealing with increased crime in whatever way they can navigate. And of course, that's going to come with a more authoritarian hand. So you're going to have more engagements between the public and police, which are not positive, which is going to cause more problems in that respect. And this is just going to be a gradual breakdown. And I really don't see any positive silver lining. There's definitely a silver lining in the end of all this, but maybe many generations from now, if we're lucky, not us, but the future generations. But there's no, I think the probability of things getting better from here on in is like 1%. The probability of things getting monumentally worse is much, much higher, is the remaining 99% effectively. Now, you may share a different opinion. I'm really interested in hearing that opinion in the comment section below. And if you like these free-form monologues of mine where I just talk about what I think things are going to be like in the future, let me know in the comment section below and I'll try to do it more often. Part of the reason why I don't do it is because it's not everyone's cup of tea, especially when you're trying to appeal to a broader audience, because I put a lot of work into this channel, guys. A lot of the videos that we make, they take probably about 40 man hours to do. They take multiple production days and lots of editing days, and they don't get seen by that many people, relatively speaking. So in order for me to do a video like this, it actually sets my channel back a bit, which is why it's very important that if you do enjoy this kind of stuff, just support the channel, share the videos, like the videos. And I have a question for you too. What is a kind of video that you would be willing to share? Because I've realized that a lot of my videos I don't think are very shareable, just because they can kind of be quite sensational and hard-hitting, and maybe, it's not something that a lot of people want to post onto their social media feed, maybe out of fear of embarrassment of being a prepper or whatever the case might be. But I'm interested in hearing your thoughts on that below. So let me know in the comment section. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe if you enjoy this video and you enjoy this channel. Thanks for watching, guys. Take care, stay safe, and just prepare.